Good evening and welcome to a special edition of News Channel 3. I'm Angela Chen. All month we have brought you troubled waters, the Salton Sea Project. California's largest lake at the southern end of the Coachella Valley has been an ecological disaster for decades. The lake is drying up, becoming a bigger health problem the longer it's neglected. But as unhealthy as the lake is today, it wasn't always this way. We take you through the incredible history of the lake to the point where it all started to collapse.
Let me tell you a story of ancient waters, of buried treasure, of death and decay, and above all, a fight for the future, all at California's forgotten lake. It wasn't always like this along the shoreline of the Salton Sea. Abandoned homes, silent streets, a past life left for dead. What other beach in California feels this desolate, like you've reached the end of the world? These days, lakeside communities like Bombay Beach languish, a shadow of its former self. But in the 1960s, people could not get enough of the pleasures at the Salton Sea. A short drive south of Palm Springs, you found a true desert oasis.
We could pack a lunch, we could fish. When it got too warm, Dad'd say, "Okay, kids, it's getting warm. Let's jump out and we'll go water skiing."
A Palm Springs with water. Here is where you can find the good life in the sun.
Salton City starts to be part of a real estate craze, and there's another yacht club at Salton City. They start building a PGA golf course out there.
Old Hollywood flocked to its shores with the likes of Frank Sinatra and the Beach Boys partying at the lake. It was the glamorous place to see and be seen, with, Karp says, hundreds of thousands crowding the area. Fishing, water skiing, and boat racing reigned on high, earning the lake the nickname, the fastest body of water.
It was just so much excitement. We'd have a picnic out there and we'd have our binoculars and we'd be watching the boat races and fish, and we just had a great time.
But as we know, it would not come to last. All the more devastating because of the lake's extraordinary beginnings. What you see today of the Salton Sea is only the latest reincarnation. In past lives, the lake, known as ancient Lake Cahuilla, has dried up and refilled with Colorado River floodwaters many times over thousands of years.
The current Salton Sea's maximum depth is somewhere around 43 feet, and historically, the ancient lake was sometimes over 100 feet deep.
The writing is on the wall. That sharp waterline you see on the mountains just opposite of desert shores shows just how high the Salton Sea used to be. At one point, historical records show the Salton Sea was connected to the ocean. It's in one of these past lives in the 1600s that the legend of the lost ship of the desert is born.
The lost pearl ship of Juan de Iturbide, who was a Spanish explorer who was on an expedition to gather pearls, and his boat supposedly had gems on it. And it's in 1615 that he's exploring the Gulf of California. And as the story goes, the tides and the conditions were just right that Iturbide and his crew were able to somehow ride into Lake Cahuilla, and that they explored Lake Cahuilla for a few days to then only find themselves landlocked. And they're now stuck. They can't get back out to the Gulf of California, and they have no other choice but to abandon their ship and go back on foot to the closest Spanish settlement, leaving behind their pearls and gems and whatever else is supposed to be on board.
And over the decades, there have been reported sightings in newspapers of a Viking mast here, a gold cross there.
There's been different people that have said they have found these things, little treasure chests.
But of course, the truth remains buried. For most of the 1800s, as far as records show, the Salton Sea was mostly a dried up lake bed. So how did this massive lake as we know it today come to be? Well, it was because of a mistake in the early 1900s when the ambitions and ego of one man shaped California's largest lake.
This really begins with a man named Charles Rockwood. And Rockwood, he had this dream of bringing the Colorado River to the Colorado Desert in California, to try to expand agriculture.
Rockwood, joined by George Chaffee, an engineer, built canals to connect water from the Colorado River to farmland. But the best laid plans often get sunk, and in 1905, a flood swelled the Colorado, overwhelmed the canal, and burst, with waves of water rushing into the Salton Sea, forming the lake as we know it today. While the beauty above can transfix, the U.S. military relished the Salton Sea for its body underneath. A test base was set up at the Salton Sea in 1942 for World War II, used for bombing range operations and rocket development and testing jet engine propellant mixtures. To this day, the lake hides vast secrets below. The Navy confirms at least 20 warplanes, from Wildcats to Avengers, crashed into these waters, with 36 men calling this lake their grave. Any plane found in the Salton Sea is United States property and better left untouched, especially because of the risk of unexploded bombs. The Navy tells us it abandoned the base in 1995, but to this day, some of those planes and bodies are still trapped down there. In the 70s, people were still high on the glittering appeal to live lakeside.
They actually start to grid streets and put in plumbing, so they have lots ready to go. But unfortunately, people kind of oversold, and even though you have this moment of great popularity and this booming time, it starts to come to an end.
It all starts to fall apart. Major flooding in the 70s and 80s. Houses get swallowed and neighborhoods are unlivable. Agricultural runoff also pours into the lake, and at one point, there's too much water in the Salton Sea.
It's in 1985 that the health department comes out to the Salton Sea and conducts a study, and they determine that the fish are unsafe to eat. They put up no fishing signs in 85. The tourist industry, the kind of heyday of old Hollywood, is gone.
With no fresh water flowing into the lake, remember, it's just water sitting in a sink, and our 120-degree summer heat, that water evaporates rapidly, leaving behind a lake that's almost twice as salty as the Pacific Ocean. Dead fish pile up, bird bodies bury the beaches. The shoreline starts to recede, opening up exposed lake bed full of chemicals and pesticides from the farm water runoff.
And decades of doing very little about it by the government, by the local tribe, by the water districts, who are all landowners here, have led us here to a 2021 Salton Sea that has lost more than 10% of its water since 2003.
If we continue down this path and nothing major is done, this is the projected future we'll face. The lake will continue to shrink, and as it does, more playa is exposed. What's left of the wildlife will die off, and that toxic dust will spread across the Coachella Valley, San Bernardino and LA counties, and more.
Southern California, for potentially millions of people, is going to be a very unpleasant and unhealthy place to live.
For those impoverished living around the Salton Sea, it already is. Cries for help drowned out by years of lip service from those in power.
And for all its fascinating history, getting anything major accomplished at the lake has been a struggle for decades. Some experts believe we are ecologically at the brink of collapse from what the Salton Sea used to support. I am in beautiful downtown Palm Springs, just an hour away from the Salton Sea. Let's see what people can tell us about it.
Dead and dry. Sad.
Dead fish, a little bit of pollution.
Smelly. There was dead fish.
I haven't heard of the Salton Sea.
Where's it at?
Ask any Californian and they'll tell you about the breathtaking beauty of Lake Tahoe or the dizzyingly good times at Lake Havasu. But ask about the Salton Sea and you'll likely get this.
It stinks.
California's largest lake starts at the southern end of the Coachella Valley, and it's unlike any lake you've seen before. 35 miles long with mesmerizing views, big enough to nearly swallow up the entire Coachella Valley. Look all you want, but don't touch.
People and pets are being urged to avoid the water at the Salton Sea due to a toxic algae outbreak.
In late April, the California State Water Resources Control Board announced harmful cyanobacteria blooms had been discovered there and that a dog had died after swimming in the water. Not even boiling or filtering Salton seawater would make it safe. This latest bit of news only shores up what most people already believe about the Salton Sea, that it's dirty, smelly, a place where some things go to die. And the sand here isn't your typical California beach sand.
Look at this. This is your ultimate calf and thigh workout. This is all dead barnacle, by the way, so you're gonna sink into it as you walk along.
Below the barnacle, clay, jelly, with a smorgasbord of bacteria and chemicals from agricultural runoff and sewage water from Mexico. As the lake recedes, dust from the exposed toxic soil below, rich with farm pesticides, increases.
It contains levels of heavy metals, arsenic, selenium, copper, DDT, and when these elements, become airborne, it has the potential to go through your lungs and your bloodstreams and even change your DNA.
Ruiz citing this preliminary study by UCR. But years ago, the lake was teeming with life. Herons, pelicans, even flamingos. More than 400 species of birds could be spotted grazing along the water. Today, the National Audubon Society says more than 150 of those species are gone, especially the bigger ones. A more toxic lake means fewer fish, which means more birds starving to death.
If you're visiting for the first time, this place might not seem so bad, but then you look down and you find a tire there, and at other spots, a dead bird.
Up to 95% of California's wetlands have been destroyed for human use.
I also see a few shovelers there.
Tracking the birds these days is Frank Ruiz with National Audubon, who wears these sort of snowshoes because of how slimy the shore is. It's like quicksand. He's on a monthly outing collecting water samples to see how salinity is changing oxygen levels in the water, which affects whether fish and other creatures can survive in the lake.
As the lake continues to shrink, it's becoming more saline, that eventually the salinity will become so thick that it will trap all the evaporation. So the Salton Sea will not lose as much water, but at that point it's going to be so brine, so salty, that probably bacteria will be the only thing that will live there.
In the past 16 years, the lake has become almost 66% saltier. The sea is now more than twice as salty as the Pacific Ocean in some parts. It's also drying up at a rapid pace.
4 years ago, it was still connected.
You're saying the water connected all the way?
Connected to the marina. So 4 years ago, we couldn't walk across, this little stretch because there was water right here.
The water is disappearing for two reasons. One, the Imperial Irrigation District had been streaming enough water in through farm runoff to maintain the lake levels, but that stopped in 2017 because of a water transfer agreement that redirected water to San Diego and other cities. So that water to replenish the lake was taken away. Two, climate change. Scorching, record-breaking temperatures are leading to faster evaporation at the lake. The Salton Sea is basically a bowl of water that, with time, gets more concentrated with salt and other questionable things. For decades, the lake's main refill source has been agricultural runoff.
There is a cautionary tale. Owens Lake near Death Valley is a dried-up lakebed environment, now the largest man-made source of hazardous dust in the nation. LA has spent more than $1 billion trying to suppress the dust, but it's still a disaster, with hazardous dust levels 10 times the acceptable standard. And here's the thing, Owens Lake is much smaller than the Salton Sea.
Dust coming off of Salton Sea Playa is significantly more toxic than regular desert dust. People are getting sicker over the last couple years because there is more exposed playa.
Already we're seeing the effects of the exposed playa in the surrounding towns.
Sometimes my throat starts hurting when I start breathing.
Josh, Angel, and Alexis live in Mecca and have been told their entire lives to go inside when the dust kicks up. Sometimes it's a blinding storm.
I used to play soccer a lot, but my parents told me to stop playing too often because that's when I start breathing heavily.
Josh and Angel have asthma, something families around the Salton Sea are used to seeing. PM10, a minute, dangerous particle, can be found in the exposed lake bed and dust here.
There's very fine dust particles, and the surrounding community already has the highest pediatric asthma hospitalization rate in the whole state of California.
The rate of asthma hospitalizations for kids living at the southern end of the lake is more than double the state. A USC study shows a whopping 35% of elementary school children here have breathing issues. The number of good air days continue to disappear.
When I used to live here, I had maybe more of a coughing in the morning or dry. You feel dryness here.
Politicians and water officials have historically been reluctant to spend the time and money fixing this, and to be fair, it is a mass undertaking to figure out how to get more water into the Salton Sea. But they have had decades and millions of dollars poured into this over the years with, so far, little to show for it. There hasn't been a lot of accountability. The cost of doing nothing could be as much as $70 billion lost dollars, from healthcare bills, worsening air quality, property devaluation, and the loss of valuable ecological habitat. While the birds and fish die, for Alexis, the oldest brother, the answer is escape.
I'll find a good job so I could get me and my family out of this place if we can.
Now, it is important to keep in mind the areas around the Salton Sea do have good air days too, but when it's bad, it can be really bad. As for the wildlife, for the last century, the Salton Sea has been a bird oasis. Birds migrating from the north use the Salton Sea as a rest stop along the Pacific Flyway, which is why the growing toxicity of the lake is very alarming. Well, the latest state budget plan recently announced by Governor Gavin Newsom includes $220 million for the Salton Sea. While the Senate and Assembly review the current plan, we are tracking the money trail, the millions of dollars already spent on the lake over the years. For all that money, why has there been so little visible progress?
Along the dusty shoreline of the Salton Sea, you could blink and you'd miss it.
We're about the only bar in 40 miles.
The Ski Inn in Bombay Beach. It's a local watering hole that's been here for decades. An obscure Anthony Bourdain stop, wallpapered with years of visitors' dollar bill legacies. It's certainly a bar that's seen better days.
There was 5 bars in this town, and they were all packed every weekend. And slowly they all went away.
Sonia, the owner here, has watched life at the lake wither away for the past 45 years.
It's a crying shame that they're letting this whole beautiful area die.
They. Just who exactly is they? Why has it been so tough to revitalize the sea, to get anything done?
There's been, unfortunately, what we could call in the community a pissing contest amongst agencies that have caused a delay.
A lot of blame passed around by those who own the land around and under the Salton Sea. A lot of cooks in the kitchen here. The biggest landowner is the Imperial Irrigation District, or IID, then the federal government. More than a dozen different landowners with different ideas of what's best for the Salton Sea.
Too much finger pointing and not enough action.
In 2015, KESQ aired this report.
This now dry lake bed should be under a few inches of water again by this time next year, barring any great setbacks.
The Red Hill Bay Marina project back then was hailed as progress. Hey. Finally, things were getting done. Except,
well, turns out there were setbacks. I'm standing where they broke ground in 2015. This project was supposed to be completed in 2016, but today, 6 years later, this earth is as dry as the day those agencies broke ground.
IID had been working on this project with federal U.S. Fish and Wildlife with state money.
The main problem with that project is because you had so many different bureaucratic agencies working on it, and because it's very complicated, when they would come up with a design and then look at the funding they had, it was insufficient, and the estimates were higher than the budget. So it's been this back and forth process.
IID and the federal government have been served with a notice of violation for all the dust blowing off the incomplete project, something IID says only delays their redesign project even more. As of May, the violation proceedings are ongoing. Much of the tension today stems from a 2003 water transfer deal called the Quantification Settlement Agreement. The state had pressured IID into redirecting farm water runoff that flowed into and replenished the Salton Sea towards San Diego and other cities instead. In return, the state promised to take care of the issues at the Salton Sea.
Hey, California, you promised, and now it's time to pay the piper and step up to your obligation.
But after that deal was made, California did nearly nothing for 16 years. And now the state is owning up, saying, while the past has seen many delays and false starts, we have made strong progress in recent years. Much is underway. The latest Salton Sea report from the California Natural Resources Agency shows $55.9 million of state funding over the past 20 years or so has been spent mostly on studies, planning, staff, and consultants, and relatively little of it on actual construction at the lake. The federal government has given at least $20 million, with a lot of that money spent on nearby farm resource conservation. Closer to the Coachella Valley, Desert Shores has been dealing with this murky mess for years.
If you look at the water now, it's orange, it's brown, it's red. There are some cyanobacteria that aren't good for people, that aren't good for pets.
Not too long ago, you could launch a boat from this dock and jet around. Not today. All residents want is a dam here to replenish the inlets with treated water to bring quality of life back. The state had promised 3 years ago to get it done.
There have been many broken promises, and that's left the population distrusting of government.
Interestingly enough, we've seen the most action at the Salton Sea this year, 2021, than in decades. And it all comes down to one thing: how much the politician in power cares. Singer Sonny Bono was the first in the mid-90s to bring attention to the plight of the lake as our congressman. But when he died in 1998, so did the national interest.
A lot of money gets invested, and then it seems like something else comes along or the political will disappears.
In the early 2000s, Governor Gray Davis got the state to agree to handle mitigation of the Salton Sea after the QSA. But when he was recalled, that commitment went to Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. His administration put together a massive $9 billion plan that wasn't too popular, and then the 2008 recession hit. So not much was done. Then Governor Jerry Brown came in, never really prioritized the Salton Sea, and so again, not much done. Now, experts credit this sudden burst of action with Governor Gavin Newsom.
He went down to the Salton Sea while he was still lieutenant governor and said, I'm going to be held accountable for this. This is on my watch.
The proof is in this species conservation habitat construction, a wetlands project by the state. It finally broke ground this past January after a 3-year delay.
We've included $240 million to keep this kind of work moving forward. And what we need to do is begin planning and investing in projects that are near the population.
For Sonia, all she wants is someone to hear her cries.
If they could just come and see the beauty and just feel, you know, the ambiance here, they should save the sea. It's a crying shame.
It is a shame that it's been neglected for so long, but now there is renewed energy, hope on the horizon. Could the Salton Sea's unique location be part of the solution in saving it?
Across the vast expanse of the Salton Sea, there's white gold in these waters deep below the ground. The Salton Sea has been called Lithium Valley for good reason.
One of the single best locations, one of the largest geothermal reservoirs in the world is right at the Salton Sea.
The Salton Sea runs along what's called the Ring of Fire, a horseshoe of high volcanic activity where you'll see the most geothermal movement. Lithium is a byproduct of the geothermal energy process, and it powers things like Teslas, iPhones, even power tools. Berkshire Hathaway Energy owns 10 of the 11 geothermal plants around the lake, recently winning government grants to see whether it can recover lithium here on a mass production level. It's never been done before.
There is an arms race going on globally for batteries, and the United States is a bystander in this race. China controls almost all the raw materials for battery production. So if we can show that lithium can be produced domestically, that could really jumpstart a much more robust clean energy battery economy in the United States.
Strange to think a place that saw its golden hour pass long ago could once again strike that hour just as we're running out of time. If lithium is successfully recovered here, Berkshire Hathaway has said it'll increase its investment into the surrounding impoverished communities. For the decades of lip service, interagency fighting, and broken promises, leaders say it's time to look forward because there's now renewed hope.
The first congressional hearing on this issue since 1997.
This past September saw the first congressional hearing in 23 years on the dying lake. Congressman Raul Ruiz has crafted a Salton Sea bill to pull federal funding and speed up projects. He hopes to have it voted on by the end of the year. The federal government is also funding the Bombay Beach Wetland Project, $700,000, still in the planning stages, and won't break ground until, at its earliest, 2023. As for the state, work has finally started on the woefully delayed Salton Sea Management Plan, a 10-year initiative to improve conditions by creating 30,000 acres of habitat and dust suppression.
And I think what we have here today is less finger pointing and more action. It took a lot of time and energy to get people to agree to get this off the ground, but we're here.
We hopped on an airboat.
Come on.
With Fish and Wildlife Services to see the state's species conservation project up close. You can see just how low the water is in some parts. And another $19 million secured for the North Lake Demonstration Project led by Riverside County and Salton Sea Authority. The intent is to restore habitat, tamp down the dust, and hopefully bring recreation and investment back to the lake.
California's solution to affordable housing is right here in the Coachella and Imperial Valleys. You can build houses here a lot cheaper than you can anywhere else. The projects that we develop and the costs associated with those projects have to demonstrate long-term sustainable value for the community and for the state.
But value means different things to different people. Some want the sparkling sheen of Hollywood to grace the waters again. But to some experts, we are too far gone. Instead, they say the focus should be on treading water and not letting things get worse. There's also debate over whether to fund smaller but achievable wetlands projects, or to think generationally and look at the bigger picture. The Salton Sea is drying up, and for some, the answer to refilling it is to dig a canal from the Gulf. Gravity would naturally carry the flow of the water since the lake is below sea level.
It makes sense to add from a virtually limitless source, which is the Pacific Ocean. It's the only source where there's enough water to make a difference. It doesn't make sense to pour the last of our southwestern drinking water into a very salty lake.
The newest construction proposal puts this plan at around $832 million. But others say, while it would be wonderful to have a port at the Salton Sea, it's currently a pie-in-the-sky dream.
It would be a great economic boon for this location. We're not there yet, and we have dust being exposed, and so we need to stop the bleeding to save the patient, and then once we can get to that stable place, then we can think of the more grand plans.
Others say desalinating the lake is the answer. But with our continuing droughts, our water shortages, and the arduous effort of cleaning it just to dump it back into the lake, experts say this proposal is unlikely.
If you're looking at the deterioration of the Salton Sea, you have time and again people putting short-term profits ahead of long-term sustainability.
But maybe, just maybe, it's different this time. After generations of kicking the can down the road, perhaps people are finally picking up responsibility.
I don't see death and decay. I see a lot of opportunity. There is still life in some of our darkest moments.
For a mess called the biggest environmental disaster in California history, it's about time we clean up and breathe life back into the Salton Sea.
Thank you for watching this special edition of News Channel 3 Troubled Waters, the Salton Sea Project. We hope you've learned just how important California's largest lake is and why we've run out of time. Now, our coverage doesn't end here. You can head over to our website, kesq.com, where you can find an interactive timeline on the history of California's largest lake, plus expanded interviews, including hearing more from the Imperial Irrigation District, explaining their role against continued criticism for the work not getting done. We hope you've enjoyed this series and continue to stay with News Channel 3 for continuing up-to-the-minute developments on the Salton Sea. I'm Angela Chen. Have a fantastic night.
Troubled Waters, the Salton Sea Project, is made possible with financial support and feedback from the USC Annenberg Center for Health Journalism Impact Fund, as well as a grant from the Society of Environmental Journalists.